This session is hosted by the Economics Department, even though Bethany is not an economist, but we'll forgive her for that. So we have Bethany Carson, who is an immigration policy researcher and organizer for Grassroots Leadership, which is a nonprofit organization located in Austin, Texas, who primarily work on immigration reform and criminal justice reform. And Bethany's topic today is quite timely. It will look at sort of the intersection of those two things, two issues that have become quite big in the upcoming presidential election, in particular, the use of private for-profit facilities for incarceration services. And specifically, she'll look at that with respect to the detention of undocumented immigrants and those seeking asylum in the U.S. So Bethany is a recent graduate of Center College in Kentucky. So she just graduated in 2013. So close to many of your ages. But her research has already garnered quite a bit of attention. I actually found out about it because she was quoted in the Washington Post. And I learned from Bethany that she's actually been quoted by Hillary Clinton in her stump speeches. All right, so we're very happy to have Bethany, who is a major of government and Spanish. So I know a lot of you are international studies majors, and she has done a number of, quite a bit of work abroad as well. And so she is a specialist in immigration reform treatment of undocumented immigrants. And so I'll let her take it away. Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad to be here and to see you all here today. I guess I lucked out because it's the only seminar in this time, so good to see all of you here. It's definitely a very present issue at the moment. So what I'm going to be talking a little bit about today is the impact that private prisons have on our immigration policy. So congratulations for being here, because private prisons are the topic of the moment right now if you are doing advocacy work on criminal justice or immigration issues right now. This is because the Department of Justice just recently announced in August that they instructed the Bureau of Prisons, which is one of the federal agencies that incarcerates folks, to do away with their private prisons within the space of 5 years. So there's a lot of debate around this. You can see some media outlets calling them private hells and saying good riddance, and then there are others that are critical and saying that it can add a lot to the cost. So I don't know how many of you have talked about the private provision of public services in maybe economics courses or other courses that you've taken, but some of the things that are typically discussed are the cost and the quality of the service. So can it save taxpayers money? And is it as good of quality as if the service were operated by a public entity? And you can see this is an excerpt from the Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates's statement from that Department of Justice announcement. And she says the private prisons do not save substantially on costs. And as noted in the Inspector General report, they don't maintain the same level of safety and security. As an advocate, having read a lot of different reports by the ACLU and others, I would second that statement. However, I want to propose another lens to view this through, because I think there are some other considerations that come into play when you're talking about particularly the private provision of prisons. So the first is a really strong moral argument against profiting from the deprivation of liberty of anyone. So, slavery was an economic system. It's something that we often think of as a grave human rights abuse, and of course it was, and still is where it still exists. But the other aspect that a lot of times that we ignore is that this was the profiting of white plantation owners and many others off of the deprivation of liberty and off of the free labor of Black people in this country. And so this is something that, people were brought to slave markets and sold based on their physical characteristics. This is the pattern that is replicated by private prisons. One of the arguments that is up for debate is whether private prisons save costs, and one of the reasons why it's so difficult to actually understand that is because private prisons basically get to choose which prisoners that they want to incarcerate. They choose by age, they can choose to exclude people from their prisons by health deficiencies or disabilities, and so depending on the terms of those contracts, it looks very similar to that bartering that happened. The other thing, so these are images from a video called "From Slavery to Mass Incarceration." I really recommend you check it out. It's by the Equal Justice Institute. And so slavery was prohibited in the 13th Amendment except for as punishment for crime. So what did the governments do? There was a widespread criminalization of existence as a Black person in this country. So, during Jim Crow, the separation of criminalization of Black people going into spaces that were designated as only whites and enforced explicitly by the local police departments. And as well as a number of other aspects of life, like criminalizing interracial marriage. If you were a Black barber, you could not serve a white woman. And so a number of different institutions. And so the people who were incarcerated under a lot of these unequal statutes were actually forced to do the same kind of labor that happened under slavery. This is something that the white plantation owners saw this as an opportunity to continue to exploit the labor of Black people. And so you can see the picture of the folks working in the cotton fields. These are prisoners. And then this is a current day picture of a prison in Louisiana. The exact same thing is happening. This is a prison guard on the horse. And these are prisoners in Louisiana today. So this is a system that still very much is profiting in some of the same ways as we have historically. The other thing is that profit continues to drive this policy. So you see these are in the 1980s, there was a series of legislation that was passed where sentences were dramatically ramped up for during the drug war. And one of the policies that was put in place was for sentences for cocaine distribution and possession. And there were unequal sentencing for crack cocaine, which was primarily used by Black people, and then the powder cocaine, which was used by white people. And there were actually an average of 3 years difference in those sentences. So this is, this and other legislation that's similar has created huge racial disparities. This is the US population, and then this is the population that is incarcerated in our prisons. So you can see that there's actually much higher populations of particularly Black people in prison. And then here's another graphic that shows that this is the number of, it's kind of hard to see the words, but these are the white people who are incarcerated. So 1 in every 106 white males, 1 in every 36 Hispanic males, and then 1 in every, I believe it says 18 Black males will be incarcerated within the span of their lifetime. So first of all, this is a huge statistic. This is just the number of people that we have incarcerated right now in our country. We are the most incarcerated society in the history of the world. So we actually have more people in prisons than China does, where their population is dramatically greater. So it's not just a percentage, we have more people incarcerated than China. And then it's these dramatic inequalities in our prison system. So the consequences of this privatization on policy itself is often overlooked. So what, the incentives of having companies that are profiting off of the existence of incarceration itself creates this incentive for that to continue. So the private prisons actually began to open their doors during the 80s and capitalized off of all of this increased sentencing during the drug wars. And so Corrections Corporation of America, which is right here, was founded in 1983, and its founder said, the co-founder Tom Beasley, prisons can be sold just like you were selling cars or real estate or hamburgers. So it's private prisons involve as much selling the idea of prisons themselves as selling their own services, because that increases their market. So here are some of the biggest, CCA and GEO are some of the biggest private prison corporations today, both in the areas of incarceration and in immigrant detention. And then here are some of the other ones, MTC, LaSalle, Emerald. There are others, but those are the biggest. So how does this have to do with immigrant detention? What do all of these corporations have at stake in immigration policy? So this is a map of our detention system. There are over 200 detention centers in total. How many of y'all knew that there were detention centers inland before just now? That there were, other than at the border? Couple hands. How many of you think that there are detention centers in Pennsylvania? All right, yeah, you're right. How many think there are more than 3? More than 5? More than 10? 20? Oh gosh, some of you think there's a lot of detention centers here. There are 12 detention centers in Pennsylvania. A lot of them are county jails that are contracted out to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, though there's also a family detention center, Burke's. It incarcerates about 100 women and children, and men actually. Those are whole family units who are seeking asylum. And the entire detention center has the entire detention system has a population of about 37,000 as of this summer. And there are 441,000 immigrants in total, at least that was the 2013 numbers, who come through the detention system in any given year. So this is a massive system, and it's incredibly privatized. So nearly 2/3 of all of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement prisons are privatized. Here's a makeup of all of the different, so here are the public ones, and then the different private ones color-coded. You can see CCA is down here in this red. GEO is the green, so GEO actually has a much larger stake in immigrant detention than in the entire world of incarceration, because CCA is actually the bigger company. And private prisons, industry estimates say that they will get 80% of any new immigrant detention business. And that's already starting to happen, because the estimates that reporters are getting when they're asking for snapshots of the immigration system, which is happening a lot after that DHS or the Department of Justice decision, because DHS is also now investigating their use of private prisons. So they're getting these estimates of 71%, which is a pretty good growth from 2/3 in 2014 to now 71%. CCA and GEO also operate 9 out of 10 of the largest detention centers in the country. And actually, all 10 of the largest detention centers are now privately operated. Because there's also this other company that came in here, Aetna Technical Services, which is not exactly a private prison company, but it is a for-profit company that provides a number of different services. So you can see a lot of them are Texas, throughout the South. There's a big one in Tacoma, Washington, and in New Mexico. And then there's the updates to that are that there are 2 new family detention centers. One is operated by CCA and the other by GEO. And they are both very large facilities in South Texas. So it wasn't always this way. There was not this massive detention infrastructure. This is actually something that has come about in the last really couple decades that it's grown so dramatically. So how did we get here? Well, first during the 1980s, also during those the ramp up of the drug war that I mentioned previously, there were mandatory detention laws created for immigrants with certain types of criminal offenses. And then in 1996 was the real paradigm shift, where with this legislation, the so-called Illegal Immigrant Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. What this act did was it expanded that category of mandatory detention. So it made it so, previously you may have had to have like a really serious offense or a drug offense to be deported. Well, now you could be deported for something that you don't even serve prison time for. And it also made any non-citizen vulnerable to deportation. So there's actually one of my coworkers, her father was deported after they made this law apply retroactively. So he had previously had a criminal offense, had really turned it around. It was old, he was continuing with his life in society, and then he was deported back to Italy. And also, of course, after the September 11th attacks, that was another huge paradigm shift in the world of immigration, because all of a sudden now immigrants were considered a security threat, even though from all the way back to World War II, we've had huge numbers of immigration. In World War II, we needed the labor. We instituted something called the Bracero Program, which was a guest worker program, and so after that ended, there was really the migration continued, but all of a sudden it was increasingly criminalized. And so these acts really contributed to that. And the agencies actually shifted. So it used to be INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and it was under the Department of Justice. Well, they moved it under this newly created Department of Homeland Security, and all of a sudden it's called Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So it's just this very much a shift in the way that immigrants are perceived. And you can see that by this statement in the Strategic Plan of Immigration and Customs Enforcement to promote the public safety and national security by ensuring the departure from the United States of all removable aliens. So here you have ICE saying, we want everyone out. It's basically what Trump is saying today, but it's already been happening in policy. Even though apprehensions at the border are actually down. There are fewer people immigrating to this country than there were in just before the 1970s. Immigration is at its lowest level now since the early 1970s. So it really, you can also trace these with the economy. So this is when our most recent recession hit, and that's when the downward spiral really started to happen. But these are our numbers of detention. So during those same years where you could see the apprehensions down, detention has only risen. And that's because of all of this increased enforcement that both the Bush administration, but really the Obama administration has ramped up. Particularly the number of deportations has skyrocketed during the years that President Obama has been in office. So one of the policies that really drives and maintains this massive deportation and detention system is the bed quota. So from about 2000 to 2006, there were pretty stable levels of detention, still a huge system, but 20,000 people in detention, roughly. Then in 2009, there was this language that started, so there were some other kind of smaller pieces of legislation that started to really try to mandate more detention, and then in 2009 there was language introduced to the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act that said that 33,400 people would be, there would be space for 33,400 people to be detained at any given time, and that they would set out the budget for that. So this wasn't actually a new piece of legislation. It was just inserted into this committee budget and passed that way. So there wasn't any public debate around this. This was kind of quietly slipped in. And it was slipped in by this Senator Robert Byrd, who was the chairman of that committee, and who had gotten his start in his political career as the exalted Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. So you can only imagine what his beliefs were about immigrants. And then in 2013, the bed quota was increased to 34,000, where it remains today. So this is one of the big incentives for incarceration of immigrants. And once you have the beds and you're paying for them, there's a huge pressure to fill them, otherwise your government is running inefficiently, right? So this is Representative Culberson of Texas. He says, this isn't optional or discretionary. You shall fill 34,000 beds. And in the cheeky form of ultra-conservative Texas senators, and I know that the chairman and all the subcommittee members will be keenly interested in helping you obey the law. So this is directed at Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. So he was complaining, Culberson was ultimately complaining that Johnson was not filling all the beds. This was back in when the numbers were a little bit down. They fell below 34,000. They were at 32 for a couple of years because apprehensions had dropped. And he was saying, no, you need to fill these beds one way or the other. So what happens is you get local quotas. These are numbers put in place by individual Immigration and Customs Enforcement field offices in different regions around the country. And so there are guaranteed minimums of how many people that ICE will lock up in those regions. And so you can see they're in all of these different field offices for sure. And this is just, this is information that was acquired by Freedom of Information Act requests. So the list is probably longer. This is a conservative estimate. But there are at least 8,522 minimum quotas that are guaranteed in each field office that they have to fill. So here are the chart of where they exist. It's a map. And so you can see a lot in Texas and a couple up here in the Northeast as well. And these are some more private entities that benefit off of these quotas and so have the incentive for them to maintain in place. They provide other kind of services like finding detention guards to work at the facilities, security services, sometimes for courtrooms, operation of the facility, management, that kind of thing. And of course these two are CCA and GEO that own and operate many of the facilities. And so there's even more financial incentives than it initially appears. What this does is it actually forces ICE agents to go out and do raids on communities and find people who have been living in their community peacefully, a lot of times for a number of years, and they are targeted for being detained and placed into deportation proceedings. So these are a couple who live in Waco. This is Naz. His full name is Nasri Mustaqim. And this is his wife, Hope, and their beautiful son, Ezra. And they have another kid, right? They're so cute now. So Naz was detained in 2011 so he had a prior offense for possession with the intent to distribute. And he had gotten 10 years probation. The judge had, seen that he was trying to, turn his life around, and so he had received probation. He actually never went to prison for it. He's from Singapore. He had a green card. He was a legal permanent resident. And then in 2011, he got a knock on his door and went down to answer it. He thought it was his parole officer. And then 4 armed guards answered the door, and he said, "Can I help you?" And it turns out they were ICE agents. They said, we are detaining you because of your prior criminal charge. And he was like, well, I've been reporting to my parole officer what's going on. He said, well, it doesn't matter. We need to take you down to the detention center. And so he's like, well, can I go tell my wife? And then, Hope said she was very confused by all this. And, by now he had a job. He was actually a manager at his work, and he had an important thing to do that day. And so he said, well, I'll just call my boss and tell him I'm running late, but then it's just a thing that will get worked out, and I'll be right back. But it turns out he was detained for 10 months in a detention center in South Texas in Pearsall. And so his wife was in social work school at Baylor University at that time, and she knew nothing about the immigrant detention system, getting attorneys or any of that, but she was, throughout this entire process, Naz's biggest advocate, went to visit him. They talked about how sad it was as newlyweds to have to visit through glass. And there's no contact visitation at all in Pearsall. So they said they would knock on the glass just to feel each other's movement from, each other's body, some sense of movement. And so this is really what these local quotas and the bed quota in total mean for real families and communities. And the community really did rally around them once Hope, got the word out about what was happening. And so her own community and some of folks from my organization at Grassroots came and showed up at their court proceedings and protested and made phone calls and all of that. And so he was finally able to get out. But it was really just a battle of persistence. There are also a lot of abuses that happen in these private detention centers themselves. This is being investigated right now, actually, by the Department of Homeland Security after there were so many abuses called out in the Bureau of Prison private facilities. This is Sarah and Nayeli, and this is her attorney. And this actually happened only a few years back, actually about 2 years ago, right when I joined, right when I came to work at Grassroots. So her attorney, Kate, called us and said, so I am working with 2 clients, a mother and a child, who are seeking asylum, and this little girl has a malignant brain tumor. And they were fleeing other violent circumstances. I think it was they were being targeted by the gangs. But her mom told the immigration enforcement officers right when she crossed the border, hey, my daughter has a malignant brain tumor. She needs medical care right now. Well, they weren't giving her proper care inside of the detention center. She was detained at the Carnes Family Detention Center that's managed by GEO. And they also wouldn't let her out of detention. And her attorney had gotten opinions from doctors saying, this is life-threatening. She needs to be getting medical care right now. And so they still wouldn't, after all of that, I still would not let her out. So we launched a call-in campaign. And finally, they were able to go free, but not until public pressure again. So these are the people who are being roped into the Immigrant Detention Center because it's such a vast and sprawling system. And there are also just all sorts of abuses that are reported, just worms in the food, negligent medical care. There have actually been 160 deaths in detention since 2003. There are transgender women who are placed in pods with men and sexually assaulted. There are also just rampant sexual assaults in general. At a detention center that's about 45 minutes out of Austin, there was a guard who was sexually assaulting women on the way to the airport to be deported. So, these kind of things are just really inherent to incarceration, and they're going to happen, but particularly where there's a profit incentive to provide fewer services, providing fewer guards. They actually proved that in that case that happened outside of Austin, that the reason that was able to happen was because they allowed one guard to drive the van instead of the industry standard is 2, so that kind of thing doesn't happen and there's checks and balances. And then here's a woman who's currently detained at the Laredo Processing Center who wrote us a letter. She is seeking asylum from domestic violence. All throughout a few different countries in Central America, there are huge issues with women not receiving help from the police when they report domestic violence or being targeted for things that their male partners have done. Or if someone reports an abuse, then they're targeted by the police themselves oftentimes. So she is a survivor of domestic violence, and she's reporting that the verbal abuse by guards, she says they shout at us so loudly, makes her feel faint, and she feels her body going weak because that's reminds her of how she has been treated by her abusive partner. So these are facilities that are completely inadequate for detaining people who are fleeing violence. So all of that just goes to show that when you have a for-profit provision of prisons, they're really responsible to their shareholders. They are not responsive to needs of community, of taxpayers, or of the people who are incarcerated inside of those facilities and their families. So this is something that CCA released to their shareholders in their 2010 annual report. It says they've been successful in increasing the number of residents in their care and continue to pursue a number of initiatives intended to further increase our occupancy and revenue. So there again, you have expansion of the detention system, and they're bragging about it to their shareholders. So more detention is a bigger market. It's currently a $2.3 billion industry, and they want it to stay that way. And they do that by lobbying. So CCA and GEO, for about the 6 years after the implementation of that bed quota, spent $11 million combined on lobbying on immigration issues. So that includes stuff like immigration reform. You can see that during the 2013 comprehensive immigration reform debates, where they had that Gang of Eight proposal. I don't know if some of y'all were following that. At the time, there was a spike in the amount of money they spent. So you can literally trace it to when certain legislation is being discussed. And then it went down after comprehensive immigration reform died. And then they also spent $10 million on the Appropriations Committee itself, which is the point of control of the quota where it was initially created. And CCA, in fact, spends an incredible amount of its revenue or incredible amount of their lobbying dollars on the quota itself. So this is about over 80% in 2012 of their total lobbying money went basically to lobbying the quota. It was spent on this commission. So it worked. Their lobbying actually, you can see, they significantly expanded their portion of the market inside of the immigration detention system. In 2009, it was about half, 49%, and then it increased to just under 2/3 in 2014, 62%, and is now the estimates are around about 71%. And here are their profits. You can see that they have been profiting handsomely from that. These numbers will have dipped a little bit after the DOJ decision, but not a whole lot. And their stock prices, so keeping their shareholders happy. And why do they care so much about the quota? Well, if you say you're maintaining 34,000 beds in one of these agencies where 44% of their revenue comes from, that's basically a taxpayer-financed insurance policy. So we're paying for this enormous level of detention that's actually unnecessary just so that private prisons can continue to make the same level of profits and be sure that they're going to maintain those for their shareholders. So now we're going to do a little activity. It's called the Deportation Machine. And you'll see kind of the incentives that are built by these lobbyists and politicians and media and all these narratives that are floating around. So I will need some volunteers for this. Let's see, I think I need about 10.
Immigrants are invading our country.
All right, start again with the politicians. It's easier if y'all step out, and then we'll come up whenever you're called. And then, because we're going to build the line, we're going to continue going down the line.
So, for me?
Yeah.
Politician? Okay. Immigrant detention will make us safer.
Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants Immigrants are invading our country.
All right, now bring in the police.
Okay. Open up, it's the police.
All right. You can come in a line over here if you want. Yeah, so it's easier.
So I'm going.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, got it. Okay. Immigrant detention will make us safer. Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants are invading our country.
Open up, it's the police.
All right, now what about the ICE officer?
No documents, come with us.
All right. Okay, back with the politician.
Immigrant detention will make us safer. Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants are invading our country.
Open up, it's the police.
No documents, come with us.
And the detained immigrant?
I need to get home to my family.
All right.
Immigrant detention will make us safer. Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants are invading our country.
Open up, it's the police.
No documents, come with us. I need to get home to my family.
And what about the prison guard?
When I look at you, I see $80 a day.
Immigrant detention will make us safer. Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants are invading our country.
Open up, it's the police.
No documents, come with us. I need to get home to my family.
When I look at you, I see $80 a day.
And the child?
I want my mom.
Immigrant detention will make us safer. Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants are invading our country.
Open up, it's the police.
No documents, come with us. I need to get home to my family.
When I look at you, I see $80 a day. I want my mom.
And the judge?
You are ordered to be deported.
Immigrant detention will make us safer. Immigrant detention is good for business.
Immigrants are invading our country.
Open up, it's the police.
No documents, come with us. I need to get home to my family.
When I look at you, I see $80 a day. I want my mom. You are ordered to be deported.
All right, give a round of applause to our volunteers. All right, y'all can take your seats. Yeah. I don't need them. So y'all can keep the slips if you want. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so did y'all kind of see how that there's this rhetoric that private prison lobbyists are telling the politicians, and then politicians repeat this to the media, and it all kind of feeds off of each other in this vicious cycle. And it doesn't reflect the experience of the mom and the child over there that are just saying, I just want to be with my family. I want my mom. I don't know why she's not here. There's actually a woman who I talked to over the phone who was just deported while her child, who was separated from her at the border, was sent to a Health and Human Services facility, and so they're now separated from each other by a border with no real chance at being reunited. So there's a lot of kind of the system that is set up that is very divorced from the people who get caught up in it. So now that we've talked about what is known as the civil immigrant detention system, because these folks who are in these private immigrant detention centers are not being charged with any kind of crime, we also have this other system over here on the other side, which is immigrants who are incarcerated for federal felony and misdemeanor prosecutions for crossing the border. So this is actually arguably illegal by international standards, but we still do it. And so what has happened, it's called, it's in the code, it's 8 U.S. Code 1325 is the misdemeanor prosecution for entering the country without documents. And then 1326 is re-entering the country, and that is actually a felony. So you can get up to 6 months for the misdemeanor. And as far as the statutory limit, you can actually get up to 20 years. I don't know if anyone has, but there have definitely been people who get up to 10 years for re-entry. These are pure status offenses, so just for crossing the border without documents. There are sentencing that is elevated for prior criminal history, but the actual, what's called the leading charge itself, the reason why they're being charged, is just for crossing the border without proper documents. And so this was incredibly ramped up in 2005. Before then, these charges had been used in very rare occasions if they couldn't kind of charge someone else who they wanted to charge on what they were trying to charge them on. Say they didn't have enough evidence to prosecute them on, say, a drug charge. Then they brought this reentry charge, and then they prosecuted them that way. Well, in 2005, they started purely doing these prosecutions in massive numbers. They would take 70 people, pack them into one courtroom. They condense the process. So usually you have to go to like an arraignment, and you have initial appearance, you have an arraignment, then you have the sentencing. They collapsed it all into one process. People initially didn't even meet with real attorneys. They met with a translator who described the process to them. So huge deprivations of due process going on here. And so this is still happening. Operation Streamline is still occurring in many of the border districts. It started in Del Rio. It expanded to Tucson, Arizona border district. And in Tucson, they actually do something that's called flip-flops, which means that they prosecute people on reentry and then have them plead down to entry. So they don't get huge sentences, but they have all of these entry charges on their record. And so this is just, it was meant to be this, it was known as a zero tolerance policy. So anyone who crossed the border in a specific sector is just funneled into the system, regardless of whether they've had any kind of criminal record in their past. And then there started to also be this ramp up. You can see the gray bar is the reentry charges after 2005. And then when you get into here, a couple years into the policy, there was also this massive ramp up of the reentry charges. And those are prosecuted not only at the border, but also in federal courts throughout the interior of the country. So there was really, it was part of this policy that President Obama has implemented. His administration has said, you may have heard, deporting felons, not families. The reality is that they're one and the same people, particularly when these reentry charges are involved. But the emphasis on this, on people who have criminal backgrounds, has led to this massive ramp up of reentry charges. And so who's prosecuted? Again, people who don't look like your typical picture of what you think of when you say a criminal. So it's people who come for economic opportunity, to reunite with their family. There's actually more than half of the people prosecuted under both of these charges have U.S. citizen family members, and they're trying to come to reunite with them. When I sat in on the court cases, there were people who said, there was this one man who said, my daughter has been asking for me. She really needs me to come back. She tells me, Dad, why aren't you here? And then he told the judge, well, now I can tell her I tried. And then he was deported. And so they're also coming fleeing violence, particularly those from what they call the Northern Triangle countries. That's Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, where have some of the highest murder rates in the world right now. Primarily under Operation Streamline, it's Mexicans who are being caught up in this system, but it is also folks from those countries. And about 3/4 have previously lived or worked in the United States. So they're really, you're prosecuting people with strong community ties. And so this is Francisco Aguirre. He's a labor rights and immigrant rights activist in the Washington state area. And so this is him and his family. He was actually threatened with 20 years in one of the federal criminal alien requirement prisons, which we'll talk about in a minute, for really just doing his work. But he had previously been deported after a criminal conviction and then come back to be with his family. He's also an asylum seeker, so he said, I couldn't stay there. It was either come back or I would be killed, so he did. And so then years later, after he was a really strong labor and immigrant rights activist, they had decided to prosecute him for reentry. And so this is the kind of retaliatory charges that this opens us up to as well. And this is Cecilia Kiwa, who, and her father, who was deported for reentry. And she actually came and joined us speaking about her experience of having her father deported for this. And he was incarcerated for 2 years in also in one of those prisons. And she is actually a law graduate, and she just passed the bar recently. And she just has an amazing story where she tells, I went to law school to try to understand why this happened and to be there for my family because whenever he was apprehended, everyone was calling me and saying, what do I do? But then she says, I understand it even less because of the concept of mens rea, or the guilty mind. And she says that my father, the only thing he was guilty of was trying to come back to be with my sister and I and help us grow and develop. And, I don't see that as a crime. And then this is Insis, who is an asylum seeker, and she was actually detained for about a year in one of the civil immigrant detention centers, the one by Austin, actually, after being prosecuted for improper entry. And her only crime was that she entered the country. It was her first time entering the country. She just happened to be in one of those areas. And so she was charged with that federal misdemeanor, which is now on her record. And this is her she actually was also one of the main organizers of that hunger strike that I showed you the quote from earlier, and is here kind of marching in a rally in DC. So this is an entirely failed policy. There's no deterrent effect, according to many judges and federal defenders who we talked to. It's expensive. There's been $7 billion in incarceration costs. Nearly all of that has gone to private prisons. And it furthers mass incarceration because this is actually, these prosecutions make up half of all federal prosecutions in 2015. So just think about that. Half of all federal prosecutions are basically status offenses for trespassing against across a very, very important line. And then nearly a quarter of the Bureau of Prison population are non-citizens. So again, furthering those inequalities in our criminal justice system. So this is where private prisons come in. Without private prisons, there is no way that the Department of Justice would have been able to implement this policy in the first place because they did not have the space to incarcerate all these people. For this policy is when they actually started opening these criminal alien requirement prisons, which are segregated, unequal prisons for particularly non-citizens. And their logic in opening them was, well, hey, these people aren't going to reintegrate into our society, so we don't need to give them any programs. And we can just open up all these substandard facilities. And this is where we'll put everyone who's prosecuted for reentry. Well, these prisons have had, rampant sexual abuse, deaths from medical neglect. There was a fantastic expose in The Nation recently on this. And that's, I think, one of the things that was the last straw that led to this Department of Justice decision that I opened the presentation with. And it pointed out this huge revolving door issue where former Bureau of Prison directors went to work for these, for CCA, for GEO, these private prison corporations, and then came back and tried to influence Bureau of Prison policies, particularly when they wanted to either financially penalize a company for not fulfilling the terms of the contract, or they wanted to actually close a facility. And they came back and said, oh, no, let's just clear up this issue. And so there's actually some of the lower contracting staff that spoke out to The Nation that said, hey, we actually wanted to terminate these contracts and do our jobs, but we couldn't because there was this revolving door issue going on. So it raises a huge issue about oversight and about conflict of interest. So is this the beginning of the end for private prisons now that the Department of Justice has shut down or said they're going to phase out these private prisons within a space of 5 years? Well, there's a lot of momentum building. There are 13 prisons that will be phased out over 5 years. There's also in California, there was a great act called the Dignity Not Detention Act. Unfortunately, it was vetoed by the governor, who said that he wanted the federal government to do immigration reform and sort it out nationally. But that act would have prohibited, it passed Congress, it passed both of the houses in the California legislature. And then there's also, so then there's the Department of Homeland Security investigation that's happening right now that was announced shortly after the Department of Justice decision. So that's that first system that I was talking about that involves the whole bed quota. They're currently investigating their use of private prisons, even though they have an incredibly privatized system. However, the majority of the private prison revenue is still safe and not being investigated because the majority of our incarceration in this country and the majority of for-profit incarceration is still at the state level. So state reform can do an incredibly lot for this, particularly California, Florida, Arizona, Texas. And then most of their revenue at the federal level is actually in the U.S. Marshal Service and in Department of Homeland Security. The Marshal Service does a lot of like pretrial incarceration, including for improper entry, and then Department of Homeland Security are all those civil immigrant detention systems. So one thing we have going on right now is that there is this narrative about, we can't, under the Department of Homeland Security investigation, we can't close down private prisons because then it would just turn our system upside down. This is Sarah Saldana, who's the head of ICE. She said it would pretty much turn our system upside down. Ending private prisons would require ICE to build detention centers, hire staff. Well, she's kind of missing the point because it's this argument where you're starting with the idea that you have to have this massive detention infrastructure that's expensive to taxpayers, that's unnecessary in the first place. And so you get these kind of false premises going on where private prisons are advocating for all these aggressive enforcement policies. And then the aggressive enforcement policies need a large detention infrastructure. And then that large detention structure in turn requires private prisons. But that's not the premise that you can start with an investigation like that. It's what they're attempting to do right now. It's how they're interpreting their mandate. But really what we need is an analysis of the entire system. Because look who we're detaining and deporting right now. It's 40% have no conviction whatsoever. An additional almost 20% are those immigration convictions that I talked about, the entry and reentry. So that's like 60% that's no criminal record whatsoever, essentially. And then these 20% are nonviolent convictions, and then another 20 potentially violent. That's also under the category, though, of what ICE considers an aggregated felony under those mandatory detention laws that were passed. So it really isn't things a lot of times that you or I would consider violent. And so this also includes asylum seekers, it includes family of US citizens, and it includes longtime US residents. So what are the alternatives? If we didn't have this massive detention system, what could be in its place? Well, there is some community-based housing like this one that exists in Austin called Casa Marianela. And it's a really nice place. It has probably a capacity for about 50 people at a time. And people can move about freely there. They can go to their court cases. They're actually required to go to their court cases and report still. So the legal process is still very much in place, even as they're out living in the community and trying to pursue their lives. They are able to have normal introductions into society like a refugee might. Many of these are refugees. They just come through the asylum process. So these kind of community alternatives exist in a lot of different cities. And then the other thing is most people actually have family or friends in the country who are being detained. So their family and friends actually write sponsorship letters, really begging ICE to let them come live with us, please, because that's, most people don't actually come who don't have those connections. So a lot of our issues could be solved going back to what happened in the 1970s and 1980s, really before the massive ramp up, was just we didn't have this massive detention system, and we didn't need it because everyone was free to go and live with their families while they pursued their court cases that would determine their immigration status. And those alternatives would be cheaper, more humane, actually legal, because there's a lot of legal challenges right now to the immigrant detention system, including one on family detention that's related to a legal settlement about the treatment of children in federal custody. And so that is actually being adjudicated right now. It's also taking more federal dollars to do that. And it would be a fact-driven alternative because right now, our detention system is based on this narrative of fear. It's based on the premise that immigrants are security threats. It's based on the premise that they are criminals. It's based on a lot of, rhetoric like Donald Trump purports that, all Mexicans are rapists and murderers. And obviously we know that not to be true. And factually, immigrants commit less crime than the general U.S. population. So, that's the private prisons are very much incentivizing this whole expansion and maintenance of this massive detention system that there are a lot of really rational arguments that we don't need in this country. So that's the end. I'll take questions.